Today, our topic is on the Diamond Sutra. In fact, I'm going to use 2 days to give the teaching on the Diamond Sutra. Today, the topic is the Diamond Sutra and science, and tomorrow, the topic is Diamond Sutra and the practice. These 2 classes, in fact, I think I want to give some teachings based on the ideas and perspective from the Diamond Sutra. On the other hand, or from a different perspective, I really think everyone needs a good oral transmission of the Diamond Sutra. I indeed already gave the Diamond Sutra's oral transmission, especially last year, back at the end of 2018. I gave the oral transmission, and now I'm giving this again because it's quite important to receive as many oral transmissions as possible. I know that many of you have already received it and who are eager to receive it again. And there are people who had never received it and are even more eager to receive it. In fact, the teaching of the Buddha, the teaching on the transcendental wisdom, is very important. And this text is taking great importance in the Han Buddhism. Among some other sutras, such as the Heart Sutra, Diamond Sutra, Vimalakirti Sutra, Shrangama Sutra, and the Lotus Sutra. There are more sutras, of course, including Amitabha Sutra, as well as the Medicine Buddha Sutra, the Medicine Buddha's Aspiration Sutra. All of these kind of sutras are taken great importance in the Han Buddhism. But out of all, the Diamond Sutra is the most well-known and the most important. In fact, back at the time when Pongso Rinpoche were still with us, he said that even within 1 year, even if you have only 10 days, it is quite important to give the teaching and study the words of my perfect teacher. So for many years, every year, Pongso Rinpoche would give teaching of words of my perfect teacher. So I think this kind of continuum of learning, of listening and contemplation could really imprint upon your mind stream and would take root in your mind and make a great foundation for you. Yes, once or twice you could listen to it, but listen to it only for a few times. It doesn't really make very deep impressions for you, especially the first or second time. It sounds all very fuzzy. It is only until you listen to it for the second or third time you can grasp or you can have a little glimpses on it. That is why there are people who have already listened to the Diamond Sutra for many, many times, and they would still continue to listen. Unlike the worldly knowledge, such as primary school, middle school, or university school, all those kind of knowledge you could listen or study for once or twice. And you don't really have to repeat it again and again because, in fact, for many times, it is not necessary to repeat it, but the Buddhism teachings are quite profound, and it is worth to listen and repeat it again and again. Originally, I really wanted to give some other teachings, but lots of people requested me to give the teaching of the Diamond Sutra, especially nowadays it's the holiday time and lots of people are coming and tourists and so on. So I was requested to give this teaching again. And on top of that, the Diamond Sutra has such great power and blessings. I think it's quite important to give it again anyhow. A few years ago, I gave the teaching on the Diamond Sutra as well as I told the stories of the personal experience and personal stories of practicing and chanting the Diamond Sutra or other people's stories. There's a book, in fact, it's called The Collection of Personal Stories up on practicing and reciting the Diamond Sutra, all the way from the Tang Dynasty, which dated back to 600 CE, and until the Qing Dynasty, the early 18th or 19th century. In fact, all of these kind of stories are quite well known. The modern days, however, I have never really heard too much of the stories written down. Maybe on one hand, it is because people are very much busy with lots of technological advancement and lots of distractions. This book is a collection of merits of practicing and chanting the Diamond Sutra. This is my translation that is printed right now. I think nowadays people don't really study and research into the sutras and shastras and the stories, personal practice stories, and so on. Let's just look at how many people are actually giving teaching on Shurangama Sutra or the Diamond Sutra. In fact, not many people are teaching it nowadays. And the collections of personal stories and experience up on practicing the Diamond Sutra is also very rare. So, our generation, in fact, is quite important to collect the stories of people's insights or experience or even enlightenment based on practicing the Diamond Sutra, or how people dispel obstacles, dispel illness, and all of those kind of stories. It's quite important to collect them, especially nowadays we have the advantage of technology and swift passing of the information. So we should collect them so that people would know. In the Tibetan culture, every year we would invite the monastics to come to our family to chant the Diamond Sutra, the Good Kalpa Sutra, and other sutras, so that it would dispel different obstacles. I think this kind of wishes that we have is not really limited to Tibetan people. People, in fact, in mainland, in different areas around the world, we have similar wish for health, for harmony, for happiness, all of such. In fact, the Diamond Sutra could have such power and blessings that could bring all your wishes, could make all your wishes come true and dispel the obstacles. At the beginning, when we do such kind of rituals, we didn't really understand why we do that. But later on, I understood that it is quite important to do so in order to dispel the obstacles. In fact, only relying upon the materialistic methods to help us to make sure that we can dispel obstacles and so on is probably very limited. Therefore, we should also use the methods of spiritual power. Therefore, today I'm giving you the oral transmission so that it could bring you blessings and power to overcome all the obstacles and bring all the happiness and harmony to your life. That's one aspect of my aspiration of giving this teaching. The other aspect is that, in fact, the Diamond Sutra is a teaching on emptiness when it comes to characteristic, no characteristic, and so on. Lots of the content, in fact, is quite difficult to understand, and I would like to further explain it later. But why I chose this text to teach is because, in fact, the Diamond Sutra is the least religious and more secular sutra out of all the sutras, because it is giving the teaching of the most ultimate and the most profound teaching. Majority of religions would give the teaching in a very different way, because they won't talk about how it is not, you should not then rely on the characteristics and rely on the correct dharma. So you wouldn't say that at all. But in Buddhism, in fact, this teaching is very unique and stand out among all the religions, because it gives the teaching of the profound teaching. Rather, lots of other sutras will talk about karma and samsara and so on. But in Diamond Sutra, it talks about as long as there's physical appearance, as long as there's appearance, it is illusion. So none of the other teachings from the religious texts would say that as long as you search for me in terms of appearance, in terms of sound, and in terms of form, then you are stepping on the wrong path. You cannot see the true Tathagata. And who and how you should see the Tathagata. In fact, Tathagata is devoid of form, devoid of smell, fragrance, devoid of all kinds of characteristics. Now, we have this advancement of technology and science, where the scientists are currently working on to look for the truth of all phenomena. And now what the quantum physicists found is that the truth is not the form or the appearance that you can grasp onto. If we were to use the scientific form of scientific perspective to look for the truth, we'll be able to see that the energy or the consciousness and all of that, in fact, they are all empty as well. We talk about how form is emptiness, emptiness is form. What does that mean? It means that whatever we perceive, whatever we see, whatever we think that we're being very, very objective, it may not be at all, because it is very much mixed with history, with your custom, with your habitual pattern, with your mentality or your mood. Lots of other ingredients are then conjoined with different factors. Many people hear the name of Diamond Sutra, they would say, oh, that's a Buddhism text. But the teaching that's given by the Buddha in the sutra, it says that it is then breaking through all or cutting through all the appearances or forms or anything that appears. And this is very unique, because when you look for the truth, when you look for the truth, this is the root of it. If you want to look for a belief or a religion inside the Diamond Sutra, you won't be able to find it. If you were to say that I want to find the Buddha that I want to believe in the Diamond Sutra, you will be able to find that the Buddha said that do not try to find me in appearance, in the sound, in the smell, and all of these, because that is not the true Tathagata. So it talks about the most profound teaching. Throughout history, in fact, the Diamond Sutra is had been translated many times. The earliest translation is translated by Kramajiva, and later on, many other great masters translated this as well, all the way to the Tangshan Emperor, as well as Yi Jing, and many more great masters. And I think in history, it is recorded that there were 8 Chinese translations, but right now 2 versions has already lost. So in the Chinese version, there are 6 versions, 6 translated versions. The Korean translation is also a very early translation that's translated into Korean language into around the 13th century. The English translation, the earliest English translation of the Diamond Sutra was back in 1800 something. And it is also said the earliest survived printed text on record in history is the Diamond Sutra. And that was back in the year of 868 CE. It was the earliest survived printed text. And in fact, the Diamond Sutra has such miraculous history, including that it is then translated into many different languages, in Tibetan, in Chinese, in English, in many different languages, in French, and so on. Lots of people don't really understand what it is. In fact, because of the teaching in it and the wording in it, it's very difficult to understand, but people still like to chant it and read it. The Xuanzang's translation is called the cutter, or the diamond cutter. In the Tibetan version, it also says that it is the diamond cutter. So directly it could cut through the diamond. It is a teaching on emptiness, on the prajna paramita, which could then cut the diamond. So for the people who search for wisdom, for the people who have curiosity and the eagerness to find the truth, in fact, they have a great longing and a great interest to study the Diamond Sutra. The teachings within the Diamond Sutra, in fact, is very difficult to understand, just like the Heart Sutra. But even if you don't understand, if you could carry it, if you could chant it, if you could make offering to it, such merit that you generate from it is still immeasurable. It's still difficult to calculate. Due to the limitation of time today, the way I'm giving you the teaching is that I will give you the oral transmission, and halfway through the course, I will give you some teachings. So I'll give you half of the oral transmission, the first half, and then tomorrow I'll give you the second half of the oral transmission, along with my advice about the practice of it.
Shirji Bardo Shimbado Chichu Pajisha Tabachim do Jusu Jakarkata Aryan Banzer Zizan Daga Janja Paramatana Maha Yana Sitra Urkutum Bashirji Bardo Shimbado Chichu Pajisha Jansu Tabachimbo Sanjitan Janjus Tabachimbundo Sanjitan Shansu Samatamjal Shumzalo, the good of the Yosuna, Jonathan de Nyamutna, Yarjaki Sam, Gomezivji Kangaravana, Gerlon Tony, Ringavia, G, Gerlon Gagan, Jimbodan, Chansusan, Gagan, Jimbodan, Raptum Mambo, Tardan, Tachi, the Jigsaw, and Jonathan de Nadruti, Santaptan, Chukur, Kalak, Sorte, Hons of Namne, Nyamuki, Jonker, Chamber, Surnum, give share the Shazot, and Jonathan de Nyamuki, Jonker, Chamber, Surnum, give share the Shani. Jerzy sur de Zeki Shavan Zatti Jerzy sorti zeki shavam zate zeki shavam zate zeki shavam zate sornyum pande longze tang chuku jegne jav serte dan shamba ne la kirmo zhongge jigne shke zhangbo zhangde zhamba ngonde jegne jingsu 他那个《金刚经》不是前面有一个
The Diamond Sutra, in fact, at the
就说那
beginning
个
has
去到城市，然后发愿以后呢，
the story, or rather the prologue, where it talks about how the Buddha went into the city after receiving the offering, and then the Buddha was bathing his feet. There is a picture that
这个壁画呢，就是应该说是
then describes this scene. That is the mural from the
是在那个
Dunhuang
世界上是
cave.
非常非常的这个著名。
That's where the Buddha was washing and bathing and washing his feet. So this picture was painted back in the 8th century.
然后对这个现在来讲的话呢，应该这个世界上是非常这个著名的，就是这样。
And this picture is very well
画像
known,
就是从这个
very
画像当
popular
中
and
的话呢
famous.
就是也可以看
And
出
from
来
this
古代
picture,
的话呢
we can see that the Tathagata, in
僧侣
fact,
这个契机吧，这个其实有些人呢
was then washing his feet, and that's his lifestyle. I think from the picture, from the tanka,
看出来就是当时
we can see the life and
还有
the
呢，我们要
scenes
知道的
of
是什么呢？就是这个所谓的金刚
of
经
the
应
lifestyle
该
at
在
that
历史
time.
上就是包括在这个东
In
方
the
史当中
history,
呢，它是怎么样这个发现的？就是怎么样就是后来呢，就是得以这个弘扬的。
in fact, we should
这
read
些情
into
况
the
的话呢
history
应
and
该记录
look
历史性
into how
尤其是现在
this part of the
这个国
history
外的
was
很多翻
kept,
译的
was
话呢
discovered, and
这个
was
有些是
later
藏文字
on
典的这个翻出去的，
then
有
kept
其
and
他文字
recorded, and so
有
on.
些是从藏文当中翻出去的。
Some of the English translations are translated from Tibetan or translated from Sanskrit, and some are translated from Chinese, and some are translated based on the different scriptures or different languages.
我建议呢，
Therefore,
有机会的
when
话，
we
最
are
好
learning
多
the teachings
对照一下就是
of
其他不同
Prajna
的这个
Paramita on
版
the
本
emptiness,
其
we,
他不同的
I think
版
we
本
should
这样的话
then
呢，
compare to different
其
editions,
实对里面的真正的
which
这个
would be
经典的
very
意思呢，就是可能会
helpful
明白。
for
当然
us
有些
to
时候的话呢，
understand the
这里就
teachings
这样
of the
说，那里
sutra.
就那样说。
Of course,
这就
sometimes
在
it
看
says that
摩登经
it
济
says
就是
this
它
in
有很
one
多不
version,
同
it
的
says
那
that
个
in a
版
different
本
version.
然后我
Recently,
经
I've
历了
been
那个
reading
不同
into
的
the
这个
Sutra
版本
of
然后
Matangi
我想
woman,
本来
and
发
then
现
at
这个
that
上
time, I
版本的
felt
话呢
that some of
具
them
体
says
是要
that, and
对
some
照
of
对
that,
照很多
some of
不同
the
的这个
editions
版
says
本
something
才能
different.
才能这个发现。就所以我们
And
在这里
I
很
think
多
when
佛
it
教
comes
徒
to
当中呢，
translation, when
就
it
缺
comes
少
to
这个什么样的，
then
就缺少这个
studying,
研究
we
的这个
don't
精
really
神。
know what it
按理来
means
讲应该
without
佛教徒也
make
可以非佛
comparisons
教徒
of
现
different
在很多非
sutras.
佛教徒的话呢，把佛
Therefore,
教
I
里面的个别的
encourage
经典呢，就是作为他一生的这种研究。他不一定有
Therefore, I
信仰，但
encourage
是呢，
the
他有
practitioners
智
as
慧。
well as
像金刚经这样的
non-practitioners
话呢，即使
to
你没
then
有任何信
study
仰的话呢，你
one
通过你的
text
智慧来去研
and
究，
in
应该对这
great
个
depth, so
了
that you will be able to
了
gain
达
the
这万法
depth
的
of
真
the
相。所以
knowledge
这是
and
很有
even
很
the
有这个
truth
必要
of
的。
phenomena. This is quite
那
necessary.
就是下面就怎么讲的呢？咱把我的心里就说对你给弄。 蒙不中等的格拉瓦的东呢，中等的几家啷个我想在那啷上过了些呢，就这段可多样的在那中的，neften ramjur的呢，等的不是接呢德国的在那中等的。 单类上的拉贡车吧，ramjur 单类上的，单类上的拉贡车吧，这个在那比莫了也比很啊三啊，这个中等的格拉瓦罗斯塔莫热的呢。 Jordan de Landerke Sordo, Jordan de Tejan Shabajab Jumbayon, the San Division to San Wajimbo, Renam la Pano d'Arbi, Tamba Journey the Pang d'Abada, Tejan Shabajab Jumbayon, Dabar Zoba Sandi, Dabar Zoba Sandi, Dabar Zoba Sandi, Sanani Doba Sandi. 做不成阶级，像是神话进步那么来用说，他把 담바 지니 용서 다바나 존던데 옴서를 럭소 되어서 바 옴서를 럭소 존던데 전주성과 터발라양 더버 직베 찌르터네 브르기 찌르터 브르기 찌르터 심랍도 zon르기 데르크지 소라던 존던데기 세던던 바 람절란 데르크지 꽈살도 다 다틀리나就是那个刚开始的时候啊
And then at the beginning, in the Diamond Sutra, it talks about how at that time Shuputi, the elder Shuputi, he asked the question, saying that how should one tame one's mind? This is in fact quite important. In our modern time, it's in fact very difficult to tame one's mind. And in the Diamond Sutra, it talks about how to tame one's mind. The myriads of joys and sorrows in this world, in fact, all comes from one's mind. And people don't know. People have no idea, and people have no way of knowing this. In fact, according to Mipa Rinpoche, he said that fools think that all their happiness and suffering is caused by external conditions. Thus, they're always carried away by thoughts of attachment and aversion. They feel that, well, my suffering comes from my external phenomena. My suffering comes from my parents, from my society, from other people. So they constantly then look for the faults from the external phenomena. Their desire and anger comes up and down all the time like the waves of the ocean. And they don't enjoy a moment of peace, with the goal of avoiding or acquire various things. So that's what they do all the time. In fact, in our modern society, in our life, we can also make such observation that we can see a great number of people who are suffering because they cannot tame their mind. That is why they suffer from a lack of contentment. So, if one could tame one's mind, as it is said in Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, if the noble disciples are adapted to taming the mind, the tamed mind will lead them to abiding joy. In fact, if you're able to tame your mind, then you will be able to enjoy happiness in your life, in your jobs, in your family life. And you'll be able to see that, in fact, happiness is not far away from you. It is within reach. If you were to have methods to tame your mind, you will be able to enjoy happiness from this world, from all aspects. In fact, people are searching for happiness. Everyone wants happiness. But the most important or the most swift method of pursuing happiness is to understand the truth of all phenomena. And the truth of phenomena is then taught in the Diamond Sutra. The way that it is taught, the truth of phenomena is taught in Diamond Sutra is rather very different than other sutras, such as the Lankavatara Sutra. It says that all dharmas of the three worlds, from top to bottom, I declare to be the mind only apart from the mind. In fact, this is the teaching that is taught in Diamond Sutra as well as the Lankavatara Sutra. So what does the Diamond Sutra teach? Many people ask this question. I would answer in this way. I would say that at the beginning, Shuputi asked the Buddha how to tame the mind. Because everyone in the six realms have to learn how to tame their mind. And then the Buddha gave the teaching that, in fact, the mind is empty. tomorrow we will learn how the mind doesn't have the past, doesn't have the future, and doesn't even have the present. In fact, the mind is nowhere to be obtained. The mind is empty. And once you understand that mind is empty, then you've tamed your mind. In fact, a few days ago, we've studied how different beings from different realms, due to their different habitual patterns and karmas, the way they perceive the external world are completely different. The hell realm beings perceive the world in different ways, and the human beings perceive the world in different ways. Animals perceive the world in different ways. So everything is based on the mind. It is not that the external phenomena has changed. It is rather that our mind are different. We would see that all the phenomena is outside, isn't it? You could ask this question. That there's so many external things that exist. How could they be mind? But if you were to study and analyze in the way that is taught within the Diamond Sutra, you'll be able to understand it completely. There's in fact no external phenomenon that is truly existent outside. It is only your mind. If you want to study Diamond Sutra, I think a good question to ask is that why does the sutra begin in this way, and what is it taught? So the first question that is posed by Shubhati is that how to tame one's mind, and then the Buddha gave the teaching of emptiness. So many people attain enlightenment, complete enlightenment, and attained personal insights, and attain at least happiness through the studying and chanting of the Diamond Sutra. So when you are not happy, you could chant this, or chant the Diamond Sutra or the Heart Sutra. When you are encountering some hardships, when you are going through your work, then you can chant this and the Heart Sutra. And in fact, lots of time we suffer because we cannot get what we want. But after you get what you want, you would feel this sense of fear that you don't want to lose it anymore. People who are ill, they want to get health. They want to be healthy, and people who are healthy, they don't want to get old. And that's why they go to different parlors and spas and get facial treatments and so on, so that they're so afraid of getting any wrinkles on their face, and so they want to have their face and body just as they're young. I think it is really of no use. In fact, the best way is to just study the Diamond Sutra. That's the best method. I heard that the parlors and spas are really luxurious and very expensive. There are the spas and parlors that's as luxurious as a palace. And sometimes I look at the external decors. I would ask, is it a temple? What is it? And people would tell me that it's a spa because they have good business. So they would then decorate and would construct their constructions really extravagantly. Once you study sutra, in fact, once you then attain some level of emptiness, you won't grasp onto things so solidly. Am I going to get old? Am I going to get ill? Am I going to die? You won't be able to, you won't have to go through all of those kind of anxieties anymore. Even if you study to the level of Theravada teachings and contemplate up on impermanence, you'll be able to live in a much more harmonious and peaceful state of mind. In fact, our grasping and our suffering comes from that we grasp onto the solid, we grasp onto the external phenomena as solid, where the truth of the external phenomena is illusory. I don't want to boast myself, but in fact, this is how I feel very genuinely. That is, I see that people are suffering based and for nothing really, because everything is really it is very unnecessary. Even if I meet people who are of great status, they may seem to be of a great authority and a great social status, but once you get to know them, you notice that they have so much afflictions and so much anger and so much graspings and fears. Even if you see some celebrities and singers and well-known people, in fact, once you get to know them, you see that they have lots of afflictions and lots of sufferings in their mind. My book, The Cutter, that is the teaching on the Diamond Sutra, is very popular. I think it is based on the reason that this Diamond Sutra could give the teaching on how to tame one's mind so that they don't have to suffer anymore. Sometimes I would contemplate that if I were not to receive the Mahayana teaching, I would suffer as well. But now, since I've studied the Mahayana teaching, whatever things happen in my life, any kind of changes or any kind of difficulties happen in my life, I would face them with ease. I can accept them without any problem. So, from that aspect, it is the power of Prajnaparamita.
Sertrseng zongru jiwa ji ter ki jigzora dan chomden de ki tsitan dan ba ramjur lan der ki ji kwa tsar do ramjur logzo ramjur de devjano shobe shangchib zhenghua qimbur namla pano dag bi dan ba dam so devjan shobe shangchib zhenghua qimbur namla yongsok ta bi tan bi yongsok ta do ramjur di jir na nyon la lagbar rabda yilla zongshi shangchib zhenghua tagba la yang dagbar jigbi jirtar Nebra sha jirtar jubra sha jirtar rabda zongra sha jaga nge kyula sha togo jomdan de devjan oksor ne zedan dan baram jur jomdan de ndartaram nyamba dan jomdan de zedan dan baram jur lan der kitchi ka sa to ram jur ndola sha chu sang ta bala yang da brji ben da nyam da dak semchin chizam semchin da de do adan gong ale ki ba da ngarli jeba dan zhugzhili jeba gam zidi jeba gam zigchen nam zigchen mayan nam dashi chen nam dashi chen mayan nam dashi meba mayan semchen di kamma je zam semchen dag be dag ba de dag tam je pongbo lhang me bim nyang len di bi yang si yongsim nyang le da go ter ter semchen chat me bi yongsim nyang len de jang semchen ka yang yongsim nyang le davran jera me do nyam do semche do ti chi shi jana ram jur ka te chang ju san khwa nanda shi na de semchen de shi ji na de la zhang zhe san hua ji ma xia bi xie ro di ji xie na ram ju gang semchen de shi ba ji gam zhu zhen de xi gam gang zhe de shi ji na de zhang zhe san hua ji ma xia bi xie ro yang ram ju zhang zhe san hua wo bo la ma ne ba jin ber xia wo zi ji la ma ne ba jin ber xia wo zi la yang ma ne ba jin ber xia wo de jin de zha dang zhe dang ruo dang rab xia dang chu la yang ma ne ba jin ber xia wo ram ju ji ni jiang 삼마른 더 시바 양모네 바테르 장주 생회 전노 디지르제나 람저르 장주 상화 건거 모네 버전 바디 손음지 퐁보너 람저르 차도 존 라와 마연 비쇼로 람저르 지르터 샤르디 비쇼고 남기 차도 존 라와가 냐마 람저르 기소로 앞전던데 때는 말럭조 전던데 기과서바 람저르 대전들 호당 납당 상당 땅당 고당 쇼금 참당 쇼금섬 쇼지 남기 차도 존 라가 라 냐마 ramjur jik sorab jondon de ten malagso jondon de giqatsarwa ramjur devjinda shangchib sanhwa kanglagang mangne bi jimba ti sonum gi phongbo na ramjur chadu zong lawa mayin bi shoro ramjur jin de jnyamda sem amsan pusum sobe devjing shaba lafta bar sha nyamam ramjur gi sorab jondon de ten malagso San Pusum Soba Devjan Sherba Tavram Giba Loso, Tijina, Devjan Sherbim, San Pusum Soba Jiva, Sumba Tinian Nam, Sana Pusum Soba Mamchi Lata, Go, Tekiji, Soro Adam, John Deji, Sedan Damba Ramjolan, Derkaji, Quasado, Ramjur, Chivniam, the same them, San Pusum Soba Tizam der Zuno. San Pusum Soba Tizam der Zuno.
All appearances are illusory. To see that appearances are not appearances is to see the Tathagata. Isn't that the most famous quote from the Diamond Sutra? In fact, all appearances are illusory. The main point of it talks about the 32 characteristics of the Tathagata. All kinds of appearances and all kinds of appearances are illusory, and to see the appearances are not appearances is to see the Tathagata. Some people would take appearance or when they talk about appearances illusory, they think that do not grasp onto any appearance. And in everyone's mind, there is some kind of appearance, but that kind of appearance, in fact, it is not really existent, or it is not solidly the one thing that everyone would recognize it as the same thing. In the cognitive psychology, there is a famous picture. In fact, if you were to say that if you were just to look at it, you don't really see what this picture is. But if I were to point out that there is a cow, there is a cow's face on this picture, and then you will be able to see that cow. And then if I were to say that there were two children, right, two children running on the mountains over there on the cliff, you'll be able to see the two children over there, isn't it? So our parents and the teachers, if they were to tell us that there is something on this picture, we will then perceive it in such a way. But if we never received this information, if we never heard any kind of information regarding to this picture, and then look at this, we don't see anything. Because we don't have any kind of preconception of this picture at all. Today our topic is on the science of the mind, in fact. And the back in 1779, a psychologist who was a Russian, and he translated the Diamond Sutra into the Russian language, and at that time he said that Buddhism is in fact the best science of taming the mind. I think indeed that's very true. I quoted a professor who's from China, and he was a vice principal of Tsinghua University, and his name is Shi Gong, and his field of study is biology. And he is very good at his field, and he's very professional. In one of his teaching and speech, where he said that in fact the studying of biology has already reached an end, because you will not be able to find consciousness based on its biology, based on the biology of beings. We will not be able to explain what consciousness is from the biological point of view. We have already surpassed. In fact, consciousness itself has already surpassed the level of thoughts. We will not be able to explain consciousness from the perspective of thoughts and concepts. There's no way for us to explain what consciousness is. We have to then explore what consciousness is from the aspect of religion and from the aspect of spirituality. And how could you explain consciousness? We have to then study the 51 kinds of mentality, where it has the generalization of the conflict, have the afflictions and anger and different aspects of it. If you really want to know what your mind is, I think we should look for the mind from the Buddhism aspect, and then I think looking for what a mind is not difficult at all. You can understand it from the emptiness aspect, from the luminous aspect or vivid aspect, and from the function aspect of the mind. You could recognize what the mind is from different aspects. So scientists, whatever field they may come from, in fact, at the end, when they get in touch or when they get involved with Buddhism or get some kind of studying or teachings from Buddhism, right away they understand where they got stuck. In fact, as much as our science advances, the studying on consciousness is very difficult to explore. I quoted from Dr. John von Neumann. He was very special and very smart and very well known in different fields such as mathematics and computer science, as well as game theory. What he said was that, in fact, there is something that is insubstantial that could change the substantial materialistic phenomena. Different scientists have different kinds of perspectives, and scientists, they are close to the Chittamatra or the mind-only school. So I think if they would be able to study and get into the mind school or get into the study of Buddhism, I think it will open a great path for their studying and their research. I'm speaking of this out of a very objective perspective. I'm not really just praising my own religion. In fact, I've read through lots of different kinds of materials and research written by the scientists and essays and books. But from the different perspectives, I noticed that their studying and their research is rather going to be very difficult to explore if they were only to explore it from materialistic aspect. So where it says is that to see appearances or not appearances is to see the Tathagata. Your mind is then formed of different factors. The so-called mind is formed of different factors, but out of all these kind of factors, is there really a solid existence of mind? There is really nothing. That is emptiness. For example, by holding this cup, there are people who would say that this cup is good, and some would say that it's bad. There are different percentages of chances of how people would consider it as good or as bad. But is it good or bad? You cannot get everyone to agree to it. That is why that it doesn't have a solid existence of good or bad. Just like nowadays when we vote, when we go through any democratic voting system or process, in fact, there are people who would vote for one and not the other, and then some other people would vote in a completely different way. Scientists nowadays, they say that in fact the material that exists in this universe is only about 5%. Those are the materials that we then recognize and discover. But the material in this, but the non-material that is called the dark matter that is not discovered in this universe are up to 95%. So the question of what we perceive is in fact we cannot come to a conclusion of what is good and bad. And if we were to be able to discover what those dark materials are, then I think we will be able to understand the truth. I have to finish 50 pages. I only read through 8 pages. There are about 100 pages. I have to finish 50 pages today. Over here, it says that even the correct teaching of the Dharma should be abandoned. How much more so the incorrect teaching? So some people would use this as the excuse, saying that we should then abandon the correct teaching. We should not grasp onto any appearance. Yes, from the aspect of reality, from the ultimate teaching, you should contemplate in such a way. But it could then lead you onto a wrong path. In fact, if you have not had the full enlightenment of emptiness, and if you were to then practice in such a way and not grasping or not practicing the correct Dharma, in such a way, you're only using this excuse and would accumulate negative karmas for yourself. In fact, before attaining full enlightenment, you should still then continuously to practice making offering of the Dharma, making the offerings of water and incense and all of those. There are people who then there are people nowadays who directly and study Diamond Sutra at the beginning, and they would use this teaching as an excuse for themselves to kill and to eat flesh and so on. Yes, the ultimate truth, the ultimate truth is empty. There's nothing that is solidly existing. But you have not realized that, then you should not then abandon the good and the correct Dharma. And in such a way, you won't be able to attain enlightenment, so to speak. You won't.
샘전은 점버냐 쪽든 점버냐 쪽든 점바당 강석든 점버냐 유셔로 가테 주도 메버는데 시바나요 되는 대덕거든 점버냐 여정 샘전든 점바당 쪽든 점바당 강석도 전반 결비셔로 대지지나 람저 전주선화 추경 로버업 종으로 마셔대 추마연 바랑 로버업 종으로 만저 먹종 유셔로 대외나 대라공대 대정석비 추지 남자 더 상스타버는데 시바남지 추남견 뽕으로 시에나 추마연 바나 바스타지 무지 송소 양 전든데기 세단단 바람 절란들께 집과 저도 람저 더저냠다 세마 대비전 억샤버 끈라나미 바양도 버조버 šanch도 몸버조버 상 디비 추대다가 양 요뜸 냐나 대비전 석비 추대다가 양 단남 냠나 데기 집과 서와담 전든데기 세단단 바람 절들께 집과 서도 전든데 덕급 전든데기 송버 돈 차르버 여러나 대비전 석바 라나미 바양도 버šanch도 몸버 zobar san jebi chude da layang mam jiba lagso devjang shigbe tan bi chude da gang mam jiba lagso ti jila da jena devjang shigbe chude da yang ngomber zobar san jeba gam tan ba de lang zong da mam jiba jo da mam jiba da ten chujang ma lag ba chu mam chi ba yang ma lag bi la da go ti jila da jena phbi gang zang nam nan da Dima shi ji rab da shi bi la da go chundan de jib ka sarwa ram jurun da chnyam da sam de rig ji mo kang la ji ge ton sam ji ton jim ji ten ji kam da ram bo chi snap dan ji rab da kang de jim ba rig ji mo kang ji ge sunum ji pong bo mang da je da nyam mam ram jur ji so rab chundan de mang la so de wer shag ba mang la so rig ji mo kang Jele sonum ji pongbo mangda kiedo te jila de jena sonum ji pongbo te yang pongbo mamji be la to te na de jena sobe sonum ji pongbo la son jir son so jon de ki kwarchar ram jur ji jik ji bom rik ji mo kon ton sum ji ton ji jikten ji kamda rambo ji na dan ji rap de kan war shi de jimba we kan ge chu ji nam jan de la sik thana sik jiwi sik zip cha pa chik zum zona yang jan tag la yang tag par cha jang tag par tomba na jitele sunum ji pongbo mangda ho me ba tsab me bren jero ta这里啊
And it says that the 3,000-fold world, if it were to then make offering of the jewels and all of those treasures to make offering as much as the Ganges River, and then compared to such kind of merit, in fact, the merit of studying Diamond Sutra, it has already surpassed such kind of merit to make offering to the Buddhas of the 3,000 world. So we should remember this. If we were to practice in such a way, if we were to make offering, if we were to study and listening and contemplating and practicing up on the Diamond Sutra, in fact, such kind of merit is extraordinary and surpass all kinds of other merits. So over here it talks about upholding and practicing and chanting, reciting. All of these kind of merits, in fact, is extraordinary. So Even if you don't understand, at least if you were to think about that the Diamond Sutra is so meritorious, if I were to chant it within every chant once every day and chant it once a month, chant it once a year, such kind of merit is surpass the merit of making offering to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 3,000 world. Even if you don't understand it, I think at least you should feel grateful to meet the
Ramjur Sanji Churnam Jivshavana Sanji Chutedang Dagme Badev Jangshabek Song Bishara de Tina Sanji Churnam Jivshawo Ramjur the Chinyam the Sem Yenda Jigbanda Yam the Kurdian the Jigbim Driver to Yam the Sem Mam Ramjur Jiksora Jondan de Malazoti Jizena Jondan de Chilayang Jigba Mamchi Bisla the Tina Jinda Jigba Jigyo was Layang Magic Badan Jalayang Magic Badan Jalayang Magic Chilayang Malaga, Rolayang Malaga, Shalayang Malaga, Churnamlayang Malaga, Jinda Jiba Jibyo, Tijila the Jina Jondan, Kate Jinda Jiba Nyamda, Ducker, Jinda Jibum, Jevo, Nyam the Semper Jirna, Tinila, Dodon Zamba, and Jero Lozo, Semjan, Dunzambada, Chotan Zambada, Ganzatan Zamber, and Jero Lozo, Jondan, Deji, Quatsara, Ramjurn, the Nyam the Sem de Lanchi Shirgum, the Nyam the Dakalanchi Shirgum, Jevo, Nyam the Semam, Ramjur Jitaba, Jondan, the Temalozo, Tijila the Jina Kangla. Genglan Jigu Shira Gongwa Nyam the Jigbate, Gang Mam Chibisla Dogo, Nim Bayada Kashe.
Do not fall asleep, okay? If you were to fall asleep or doze off,
Tina Lanchi Shirguma Jivia, Jondan Digi, Lanchi Shirguma, the Nyam the Dugger, Lanchi Shira, Gongwam, Jevo, Nyam the Semper Jerna, the Doctor. Zamberjera Laxo, Simson, and Zambada, Zambada, Council, and Zamberjera Laxo, Jordan, the Kikwatara, Jordan, the Nyam the same Shirmagoma, Nyam the Shirmagom, Jevo, Nyam the same Nyamo, Ramjur Sora, Jordan, the Ten Malaso teachers, the Jena Kanga, Shirmagomania, the Jigba, Chutela, and Kamaman, Jibilato, Tishan, Shirmagoma, Jibio, Jordan, the Kikwatara, Ramjur. The Nyam the same day of Japjum Batela and the Japjumbani, two of Nyam the same Ramjur Sora, Jordan, the Then Malakso, Jilat Jena Kansa Jumba, De Young Jilat, Jondan de Kata Jumba, Yam the Duck, or Jumba to Yam the Semper Jena, the Dr. Zamberjera Laxo, Simson the Zambada, Jordan Zambada Council, the Zamberjera Laxo, Jondan de Donna Division of Jumba, the Bordo San Gigi, Junior Mepani, being choked the Tande, Jondan de Dr. Jaro Jumba, Jondan de the Yam the Dogno Jumba. Nyam the Semba Laxo, Jondan de Katin, the Yam the Jumba, to Yam the Semper Jena Division of Rigiva Ramjur, Yomome Bala, Neba, Namjim Chug, Yende Chilayang, Nebe, and Yomomba, Neba, Mebala, Neba, Long, Mortun Balazzo, Jundan de Kikwat, Ramjur, Yam the same division, Shabbat, Jumbayan, Jumbayan, the Porto Santi Marmin Zada, Kanlate, Yang of Yambir, Ramjur Sora, Jundan de Ten, Malazzo, Division of Betin. 대정 사바자 좀 봐요. 또 벌써 선지 말면 저 강랑 이 주대라양 용이 맘치 발로서 준는데 기과자로 람저를 전주상과 강라라지 근데 덕그 정고파 남 저보지 나 때는 뭐된버 마고 되지지나 람저를 고바 남나 장고바 넘버 집샤 고바데도 메파 대정 사바 송버 시르데 디나 장고바 남소 람저 데타베나 샹츠 선화 첸보란드 드르머네 바집지 브르샤테 찔라 magnet simply perfect. 那个我们藏文的那个这个金刚经是。
In the Tibetan version, in fact, the Diamond Sutra is more than the condensed version that's translated by Kumarajiva, and the Xuanzang's version was, in fact, more in words than those that's compared to the Kumarajiva. I myself think that Xuanzang's version is probably the most appropriate in terms of this Diamond Sutra. I think it's probably because of the different editions that they got at the time as the root text to translate. I think at the beginning, I give the teaching of the Diamond Sutra. I give the sutra based on the Xuanzang's version, and later on, I give the teaching based on the translation of Kumarajiva due to some reasons. Anyhow, the translation given by Master Xuanzang was more specific and easier to understand, and more complete. I think the content is rather a little bit different. Where it then says that you should then the mind should act without any attachment. I think the sixth patriarch attained enlightenment based on this stanza. So it says that we should then give rise or have the mind should act without any kind of attachment. So this is the mind of emptiness. This is the core of the teaching of the Diamond Sutra. The sixth patriarch attained enlightenment based on this teaching, isn't it? But lots of people who chanted the Diamond Sutra for hundreds of times, not only they did not get enlightenment, they had more afflictions than they used to. So, as Mandimis, we may hear and we may then
Perna Keva Jika Lilander Tertender Terjarbor, some the Gerada, Ramjur Nichenium, the Lite Cheva Yenam, Ramjur Tiksura, Jordan de Lite Cheva Lagso, Derosaba, Lite Cheva Lagso, Tejilatazina Derosaba, Ubu Mamchibe, Sumbi Flato, Tina Lite, Cheva Jibio, Tela. Ubu Mamchibe, Dejan Saberson de Tena, Liji Shao, Jordan de Gikatara, Ramjur, Jim the same, the Gongolongo Jimani, Gongolongo Jimani, Tekona Jero, the Doshimaka and Batena, Mama Yenam. Ramjur Girsora, Jordan de Gongolongujima, Tedrian Mama Lagso, Tedaki, Shima, Tarmuji Chensara, Jordan de Gikatara, Ramjur, Chodo Mubara, Shago, Choti Konda Chibrashao, Gongolongujima, Cherni Pateni, Jiktengi Kamna, Kibagam, but me. Kanglala Zikarambo Chirna, then Girap the Congress, the Division of Jumba, the Portoba Sanji, and Namla Jimba, Ramjur, the Chiniam, the same. Kebagam with me, the Irzel of Sonim, the Kebagam, Ramjur, Soro, Jordan, the Malaso, the Urshaba Malaso, the Urshaba Kirdam, and Mekanglala, Sonam Gimant, the Keeper Lagso, and Jordan, the Kipkazara, Ramjur, Gungo, and Jiktin Kamdena, then Boches, not then Girap the Congress, the Division of Jumba, the Portoba Sanji, Namla Jimba, Jimba, Gungo, Chuji, Namran, the Tana, Sixbits of Jabba, Shuzon, Jantalayan, the Brujabati, Young Takbar, Rapt of Tana, Tini, Jitele, Young Sunum Chia, Manda, Home,
even more than the sands in Ganges River. Even if you uphold, even if you then chant the 4 verses of the Diamond Sutra, it is surpass the merit.
Shooting the Kira, Sijiki, Chuchi Namjan, the Lembadan, Javadan, Zambadan, Chamadan, Lobadan, Shanjabadan, Surgeon the Yella, Sheba, Yella, Shipan Sarangum, Saratan, Dambrikira, Tarmujan, Tirtombagam, Lama, Tavra Kirayan, Roma, so Tirkichika, Saratan, John the Kitchen Damba, Ramjurlander Kichika, Soro, John the Chuchi Namjan, the Mala, Chertar, Zomari, Tirkichuratan, John the Kitchen Damba. Ramjurlander Kichor, Ramjur, Chuji, Namjanda, Mashiri, Parto Shimba, and Dr. Zonji, Tijina, Ramjur, Sabat, Shirki Parto Shimba, Consum Batin, Parto Shimba, maybe Jerdatina, Shirki Parto Shimba, Jivja, Ramjur, Juniam, the same. Division Sabat Jumba, Young Garson, the Lion, Chuan, Topayotum, Yam, Ramjur, Sura, John, and the Division of Bersomba, Chute, and Kayam, Mamchi, Son, so. Hayodosha. Ramjurunda Yamda Samsur Tong some Jidon Jemo Jini Gamner, the Journey to Obama, Palatini Hayu Kachang.
In fact, I have more things to. I plan to have give more teachings, but
Jonathan de Sir, the Malaso, the Shabbat, Malaso, the Gila de Jena, Jonathan de Sir, the Kanabate, the Mamchi, but the Shabbat by on the Batina, Sumba Flato, Gotina, Dre, Jisha, Joe, and Jitengika.
Last year I gave the oral transmission as well, isn't it? How did I give teachings last year? No? Yes? No? How long did I take last year? Two classes as well? I don't think so.
Malakso te jilata jena chewe chimbum san samchi tsani kanglak ba te ro shokbe songba te dom sama mamchi ba te yung shokbe songba hlata te tina chewe chimbum san samchi tsani jib jiwo chondan de jibka tsarwa ramjur chewe jiba me kanshi ka kanko longu shime ni ji li yung sab tangwe kanka chuji namchang da tana tsuk jibi tsuk jaba zongwa te zhan dagla yang dagbar dana tenya le sonam ji mangda chang me ba khong me bram hero tena tsadan damba ramjur ji chuji shik ji mamchi chima shon tem chima chine jab cham den der ke chi sur do chu ji nam jan der da de so be chni be song ba na chung den de ngom tsarwa lo so de so ba ngom tsarwa lo so chung den de da ge yi shi ji chu ba zhen jen da ke chu ji nam jan der ngun nam na yang ma tu so ti ji la de ji na chung den de do de sha ban da la yang da ba ni den de shi ba ki bin ge ri sim jen de dong ngom tsarwa dang dang ber ji ro lo so de zhe ge fo ji
To have faith towards this sutra, in fact, is quite rare. You should read into it. The ones who have faith towards the Diamond Sutra is very rare.
렘바당 저바당 점바당 창화당 호바당 샹치불 시바데는 곰서당 담버지라 lok소대용 존든디 테너더 직불 መንጀ르 정 심진는데 시바당 쪽든 시바당 강석든데 시벌 መንጀ르 lok소티 지라데 제나 점든데 더더데 시바당 심진든데 시바당 쪽든데 시바당 강석든데 시바로 베텔라양 심진 담저다 차르라도 대지라데 제나 산지 존든데 남는데 시바당 저담 차르라도 데르기 지소라당 존든데 지제당 담바람절란데 그지 소도 람저르 대전도 대전도 심진 강동도 된도 샤발라 마적 magngwa rabda ngwa manjir wa te ngom tsir wa dang dang ber dir du jiang zhe ge fa de shi ge yu xie人不害怕的
There are people who do not have fear when they listen to this teaching. In fact, it's quite rare. Do you have fear? Are you sure? You're not afraid?
Dina parudu shimba tamba jibsha ramjur devjang shabab zobi parudu shimba somba tena zobi parudu shimba medo di jibshirna ramjur gang ke kagalang gyarbu ngi yanlagdan yanlag namjaba gyarwa di tse lab dagdan da shiba gam semchindan da shiba shudan da shiba gangzagdan da shiba nyam mawshongwe ngalan da shijang me ban jigun da shi me bar gyarwa gang mayin bishiro di jibshirna ramjur kardi di tse nga lab dagdan da shibar shungna di tse no simjin da shi jam jongwe semchen da shiba dang chudan da shiba dang gangzagdan da shiba di tse no simdan da shiba jongwe shiro ramjur nge mumbar shiba debi di na gang nga tse ngabge nga tse ribar ngabge zopa jibshawa chang chungda kirwa di tse na nga lab dagdan da shiba ma shungwa semchen da shiba chudan da shiba dang 강석든 시바 마숑 ramjur te tewe na janju sanwa chimbo de shiba tamche de shiba tamche pang de blana me bayon do borzo shangju de simki birjo azgla yang mane ber simki birjo ja dang zhe dang ro dang rxia na yang mane ber simki birjo do chula yang mane ber simki birjo go chu me bala yang mane ber simki birjo chula mane bayon simki birjo de ji ji na ne ba kan yamba te na mane bi jir de tewe na devjing shagba andar ke chi kwarzo do janju sanwa la yang mane ber jimba jimbru xiao ji song zo ramjur 상회 때들 심진담지 돈도 좀 봐용서 동르셔 심진담지 공연바 대용 대지 셔버데 대용 셔버 담지 강다가라 송비 대덕 담지니 좀에도 뒤셔도 람줄 대정 셔바나 양다 배송바 뎀브로 송바 된 뎀브로 송바 대전도 송바 대정 셔바나 로브로 송바 마임 비셔로对，这个，没有那么多，应该是这样。denbrook松吧，他这里啊，就是说，就如来是。
And over here it says that the Tathagata speak the truth, real and as it is. His words are neither deceptive nor contradictory. So the Tathagata talks about the truth of all phenomena. He knows all the detail and the truth of all phenomena. As mundane beings, in fact, mundane beings doesn't have the relative or ultimate truth, and mundane beings doesn't speak to the different faculties, to the different kinds of sentient beings. It will be very difficult for the mundane beings to speak the truth according to the different faculties of the sentient beings. But over here, it says that Tathagata speaks of the truth. The Xuanzang's version, it says that the Tathagata speaks of the truth, real, does not speak of the words that's deceptive nor contradictory. So it has only 4, but over here it has a 5. In fact, all the sutras are now included in the Tripitaka texts. All the teachings that we can read through the Tripitakas, that the teachings that's included in the Tripitaka, they are all words of truth that's spoken by the Tathagata. They are then the truth of the phenomena. So our faith towards the Tathagata is in fact not of any superstition, not of any blind faith, but the truth of the Tathagata is of benefit to all sentient beings, is of the truth, and pointing out the truth of phenomena for the sentient beings. If such kind of a speech of Tathagata is not the truth, then we don't have to listen to it. I think it will be very difficult for beings to accept it at the beginning. But if you were to read into it, if you were to study in depth, then you'll be able to develop such a kind of faith. For people who've studied the teachings on the Buddhist logic, where there's a book and a chapter specifically talking and distinguishing from the analogy, from the analysis talking about how and why the Tathagata speaks only the truth. I think it's not too much left. I thought I won't be able to finish reading it today. I remember there are about 100 pages, but now I think I will be able to finish it very soon. And I think the Taming Sutra, it talks about. It usually talks in different aspects. The first, it talks about he neither speaks of the words that's deceptive nor contradictory, and then it talks about that there is really no words that is then contradictory or deceptive. So it talks about these kind of terms and this kind of perspective in turns. Otherwise, people. In fact, I think lots of people get confused because they don't really understand this kind of logic. People who study the Madhyamika, who study the Madhyamika Avatara, they'll be able to understand this because it talks first from the relative truth and then talks about the ultimate truth. It talks about the relative truth first, and then it talks about from the level of ultimate truth. Otherwise, you won't be able to understand if you don't understand how to differentiate the relative and ultimate truth. Only if you understand it, then you'll be able to understand this text. In fact, if you were to understand, first of all, it starts of talking about how to tame one's mind. Yes, the mind does exist in our relative truth, but from ultimate truth, the mind is empty. And if you can understand it from both aspects, then you'll be able to understand the truth of our emotions and afflictions. That is why lots of sentient beings don't understand the truth, because they don't understand this kind of logic, and they don't understand the relative truth, and they don't even understand the relative truth. How can you then expect them to understand the ultimate truth? People nowadays would grasp onto the appearance aspect, would grasp onto the existent aspect, and they would grasp that everything do appear. There are people who would say that, oh, look at the rainbow, it's really beautiful. But is there anything that is really the rainbow? Is there something that is solidly graspable about the rainbow? So that's from the relative truth. Yes, it appears. From the ultimate truth, it is empty. There is nothing to grasp onto. Just as nowadays, the young children would love to grasp a piece of rainbow. They would chase it, and they would want to have a piece of it. But after chasing and after how, doesn't matter how much they try to grasp it, there's nothing to grasp onto. That is how mundane people are, that they don't understand what the reality is. There is a term that is called the post-truth era. Oxford Dictionary also included post-reality era as well. People, what that means is that the media, the news, and merchants, they would then try to sell their idea as much as possible, and then people would buy their idea, would then accept that idea. Before the discovery and before the invention of planes and trains and cannons and all of those, in fact, people don't understand what they are. And now there are the materialistic advancement, and then people recognize it. And people get distracted by all kinds of materialistic advancement, but they lost themselves, and they lost their spiritual path. Unlike how during the era where there are not enough material, I think the modern people really lack the kinds of spiritual path. People hear different kinds of news on celebrities and different kinds of rumors about others, and they would think that it's true, and then they will hold a standard of going against of them. But those kind of so-called truths are really sometimes are made up. Therefore, I think it is quite important in this era to search for the truth. So we finish the 14th chapter, and then the later part, it says that the ones who then chant, who then give the teaching of others on the even 4 verses of this sutra, then the merit is immeasurable and infinite. Tomorrow I'll give you the teaching of the second part.